Good afternoon. Please let's get the program started. I request my colleague to play a clip of Sufi praying at the first. Excellencies, honorable participants, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. At the first, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Director General of Afghan Institute of Strategic Studies, Dr. Muradian, to organize this important meeting. And also, I really appreciate the support of Embassy of Netherlands, Your Excellency, and your colleagues to support this program. In 2018, AISS initiated a new platform to facilitate impartial, independent, and professional platform to facilitate dialogues and discourses about the water, much more focusing on water diplomacy, water conflict management, and climate change. Recently, AISS has been published a comprehensive study about Harirut, one of the most stressed river in the world. Actually, it's the fourth water stressed river in the world. Today, we have honor to have Excellency Owen with us. Ambassador Owen was appointed as the first special envoy for international water affairs in 2015. As the ambassador for water, he is responsible for advocating water awareness around the world. Ambassador Owen is also Sherpa to high-level panel on water launched by UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and the World Bank President, Mr. Kim. Ambassador Owen teaches at the University of Groningen, the London School of University, and also at the Harvard GST. His last hope to be rebuilt by design, a transformative approach to climate change, explores the recovery for post-Hurricane Sandy as an opportunity to learn from. Before Ambassador Owen's presentation, let me share with you some information and some very important points about water in Afghanistan and our region. As you may know, Afghanistan has a 5-river basin, and main rivers in 4 out of 5 river basins actually are flowing to neighboring countries, which saves about 70% of our surface water. The recent Global Adaptation Index ranks Afghanistan among the most vulnerable countries in the world. We have faced many droughts. For example, in 2017, 20 provinces in Afghanistan experienced a 60% shortfall in rain and snowfall during the winter season, which led to increasingly number of internally displaced people. Just in last year, we had more than 260,000 IDPs at the western of Afghanistan. Because of the climate change, the temperature has been getting increased, and our winter getting warmer and much more rain in the spring instead of snow in winter, which recently resulted in many floods in Afghanistan, usually north and western Afghanistan. Not only Afghanistan facing these tough challenges, unfortunately, in our region, all countries, all neighboring countries facing similar challenges. According to the Washington DC Environmental Research Organization World Resource Institute, WRI, Afghanistan and all its neighbors are extremely water-stressed countries. It means more than 80% of the water available to agricultural, domestic, and industrial users in all these countries are being withdrawn annually, and the risk of water scarcity is significantly high. If you look at this picture, actually Afghanistan and its neighboring country is at the heart of the problem. All Afghanistan and all neighboring countries are actually extremely high stress country. It shows that we have a very real problem in the water management and water stress in this region. The increasing importance of the water and extremely high water stresses in our region may result in much more water conflicts, particularly when there is not any treaty on water sharing in place between Afghanistan and its neighbors, except for one, the Afghan-Iranian Treaty on Helmand River Basin, signed in 1973. Ambassador Owen, the AISS study shows the drought and flood management at the national level and water diplomacy at the regional level are supposed to be the toughest challenge for us. They require an in-depth understanding of the climate change, a political context supported by a sound assessment and integrated analysis of the water system. Now I invited you, Ambassador Owen, to start your presentation. Certainly your education, your skills, your researches could be very beneficial for Afghanistan, how to deal with these tough challenges, drought, and water diplomacy. Ambassador, please.
Thank you so much, Abdul Basir Azimi, and thank you, Dawood Moradian, Director of AISS, for having us here. There you are, very modest in the back. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Ambassador, and your team for making this possible, and Marlies for joining me here in Afghanistan. I must admit, this is my first day in Afghanistan. So I'm 51, and this is my first day in Afghanistan. Luckily, my father passed away when he was 97. So there's almost half of my life ahead of me to come back. So there's a lot of opportunity. I will try to discuss water and climate challenges around the world and see how they relate here. But since I'm not the expert on Afghanistan water, I'm also here to learn, listen to you and have a conversation on what your challenges in the context of the global challenges mean and what we perhaps can do together. I prepared a presentation, so the slides look a little bit like this, but I keep them to myself, but I will make them available so you can look at them afterwards. And sometimes I might even turn my computer around a bit to share. When I was appointed as water envoy for the Kingdom of the Netherlands on water, I found that it was very hard to find a common ground on all these water-related challenges. And for that I issued a research, and that report came out last year. It's called The Geography of Future Water Challenges, and I will present it to Director Dawood Moradian at the end of, if you still then want it, at the end of my lecture in the conversation, showcasing, and I will use it a bit in my lecture too. Okay. I'm not so good in sitting. Is it okay if I stand a bit? Yeah? Can you still hear me when I do it like this? Is that okay? Very good. Thank you. Some people around the world think climate change is like an event. Some even perceive it as an apocalypse. So we will. Wow. I like it. Thank you. So, as an apocalypse, but with an apocalypse, while devastating, it's also with no reference to climate change. And the MIT Institute in Boston in the US did a technical review of this month on the full scale of climate change, so mitigation, adaptation, but also suffering. And Royce Scranton, a writer, writes about climate change as an apocalypse and says, well, forget it. After an apocalypse, it's like with the movies. The next day, it's over. And then it's a total mess. It's a terrible situation, but still you can recover. But with climate change, the next day is always a little bit worse. So that is the challenge we have to live with and of course mitigate so tomorrow becomes less worse. Now I will share a picture of you of the Netherlands in 2300. So that's 200, like almost 300 years from now. I don't know if you can see it a bit. It looks pretty wet right now, on the picture. And it's because of sea level rise. And sea level rise is actually not our biggest concern when you think of climate change. It's a creeping creature, it goes slow, with biodiversity loss and storms and surges, but also droughts. Sea level rise next to that will actually mean that for the Netherlands we have to think and rethink our future too. Last year, while the Netherlands is a very wet place, we had our driest summer ever. So not the driest year, it was the second driest year, but it was the driest summer after one of our wettest and most stormiest winters. So extremes, like here in Afghanistan, also in the Netherlands become more extreme. And while the Netherlands is a wet place, we now have a water deficit in the eastern part of the Netherlands. And for the Dutch, the Netherlands, the people that live in the Netherlands are called Dutch people, that is a little bit crazy to have a deficit. We still don't understand. And this winter was very bad for water, hardly any rain, so we still recover when it comes to droughts. The WMO, so the World Meteorological Organization, which is like, in popular terms, the Weather Forecasting Institute of the world, that talks about climate. Every year makes a climate report, and every year it says the challenges are becoming more dire, more hard. And last year we saw it around the world. We saw typhoons in Asia, we saw droughts in Asia and Africa, we saw wildfires in the United States like never ever before, and also here in Afghanistan, droughts and floods. And at the same time, in the same places, one after the other, putting a lot of stress and challenges and burdens next to the other challenges often these vulnerable places already face. So climate change is like a big magnifying glass. It makes the extremes more extreme, but on top of the challenges we already have, it makes those challenges more dire. So the first thing I always think is that before stepping to conclusions, before getting to action, we have to understand it. We really have to understand the complexity of the problem. And first, in most cases, in a lot of places where I come, I have to talk about climate change. But I'm pretty sure I don't need to really go into a deep dive into climate change. Right? Climate change with increasing temperature makes the occurrence and impact of extreme events worse and makes the events worse. So it's like a triple disaster on all fronts. So you have more, the impact is worse, and they are worse in magnitude. So droughts are longer and tougher. Rain events become water bombs instead of just rain events, and like the whole rainfall of a month can fall in a day or an hour, flooding everything. No system can deal with these events. But if you look at the world, and I don't think you can actually see it, but no, I will do this. Believe me, every country has floods. It's almost democratic. And every country has multiple floods, all over the world. But the impact of these floods is never felt harder than here in Asia, Southeast Asia. Where vulnerability is tougher, it's more, but where also more people are impacted by these floods. So the impact from a human point of view is the worst in Asia, Southeast Asia. The most casualties on a yearly basis because of floods. And the same goes for droughts. While you might think that impacts on droughts in Africa from a human perspective are much higher. Not the case. Middle East, not the case. Here, in this region, the impacts of droughts on human beings' lives is the worst here in Asia. So you face the biggest humanitarian crisis in the context of climate change. These places that are hit by floods and droughts, by these extremes, also become hotspots of migration. So climate change is not only an environmental challenge, it's not only an economic challenge, it's a social challenge, it's a humanitarian challenge, it's a geopolitical challenge, it goes across borders. And the risks in these places where it floods increase too, and that is also a mix because we build our economies in the most vulnerable places. And it's like living on the edge of the volcano. If you look at the world in how it urbanizes fast, also in Afghanistan. So now we say we are 52 to 55% urbanized world. We estimate that in 2050 it's 75%. The number is a little different. Some say it's going to be 80. We actually expect that 80% will be a little later. But we urbanize faster on our coasts and in our riverine deltas and on our rivers. So the places that flood the most are also the places where we urbanize faster. So that means that where we are at risk most is also where we put our money in. More vulnerability from an economic point of view, also in those places at risk. Cities therefore become flood risk hotspots. It's where everything comes together, it's where we build up our economy, this is where we build up our lives and livelihoods, where our streets are actually not ready to deal with these extreme rain events and droughts. It's also where our assets build up. OECD and the World Bank estimate that in 2050, flood damages in coastal cities will tenfold in comparison to now to $52 billion losses per year. $52. And the overall flood damage in 2050 is over $1 trillion a year. I can't even think about such a number. It's so massive. This is the economic loss only because of floods. Now, you have to believe, I will send the presentation. You just have to believe me. Yeah? Okay? Is that okay? Yeah. What I see is what you don't see, but what I will make you see in a later moment. Yeah? Okay. We'll make sure that you can send this around. There are 3 regions in the world, coastal regions, so not Afghanistan, which is a landlocked country, but coastal regions where these assets are highest. It's the coastal regions where the assets are at risk are the highest. That's South and Southeast Asia. That's the East Coast and the Gulf of Mexico, part of the United States. And that's the Netherlands. It's a little crazy, yeah? So we as the Netherlands are part of the 3 regions of the world where the most assets are at risk. Miami leads the list with $278 billion at risk in 2050. Then comes Guangzhou, then New York, then New Orleans, then the Netherlands. So we're number 4 or 3 depending on how you count. And if you combine that number with the density of the places, the Netherlands is actually number 2 on the list with assets at risk. It is a map of the world with a lot of red circles. But where the red circles are not there, is actually Africa, which is in 2050 the most rapid growing region, doubled in size compared to now, where a lot of people, vulnerable people, live in vulnerable places, like now here in Asia. So looking at 2050, you see a future where Africa is in more need than we already see here. And that means that, and that's already happening right now, is that vulnerable people live in the most vulnerable places. And in their vulnerability, have the hardest time to get back on their feet. So when a flood, a drought, a disaster hits, it hits the most vulnerable the hardest, and they also have the hardest time to get back on their feet. So it's the longest time to recoup, if they can recoup at all. So extremes become more extreme, and climate change is driving like a magnifying glass everything forward. But that's not alone. You suffer water stress, like so many regions around the world. We deplete our aquifers, the rain falls and it's washed away in our rivers that we turned into canals, so we lose all the water that there is, and we forgot how to harvest the water and keep it and recharge the aquifer. We took it for granted for a long time, and now it's wasted. And before you know it, we're in a drought situation. So water stress is increasing towards the future. And in the current state, it puts billions of people and trillions of dollars at risk too. In the combination of agriculture, it actually means a low crop yield. And it works with this crop yield. So the yield is like it's the profit of the crop, not in economic, but in overall sense. It's not only what you take, but also when the seed is planted and actually ensures that there's another seed and you take it and there's another harvest. So the yield is like what you benefit from when you harvest. It requires rooted water management, rooted in a system, rooted in a culture. And we were so good at it in the past. We knew, and kings and queens of water management in the context of the world were the farmers, right? Yeah? The people that lived on the land. You, like no one else, also knew how to manage a crop per drop, or a drop per crop. Now, next to water and water stress and scarcity in agriculture and food, there is water and energy. And it has two aspects. More, of course, but two I want to mention. One, also in the context of agriculture, is that we look at renewable sources for energy. So we look at bioenergy. Biofuel demands crops. And that crop also needs water. So the crop for bioenergy competes with our food demand. Second, in the places where land is scarce, like in Afghanistan, where land is scarce, the crop, the land you need for the crop for your food is also the land you need for building your economy, is the land you need for building your cities, is the land you need for bioenergy. So there's a huge competition when you think about bioenergy on the level of land and water. The second part of energy are dams. Now, dams are good for hydropower. Dams could be good for surface water collection. But dams, of course, are devastating for rivers. They stop the river from living. A river is a living creature. It needs to be able to meander, grow, and shrink, and produce sedimentation and spill that sedimentation across. So the devastating impact post the dam does not mean that there is lots of erosion and actually a loss of land in the deltas where these rivers run into, like the Netherlands, like the Mekong, like the Mississippi. Every hour a football field of the coast of Louisiana disappears because the United States treats the Mississippi like a canal. It's not a river anymore, it's a canal. There's no sedimentation flow. 24 football fields every day. And you can count times 7, times 52. The coast disappears, first villages have to abandon the coast, and you see from the maps there. And this is also happening in other places. So coastal cities where rivers are man-managed like canals start to disappear. Then we take the water from the aquifers, so the land subsides, it sinks. And then when sea level rise and surges, these places become the most horrific, terrifying places. We plan almost 4,000 big dams that are on the drawing table. 4,000. We can't build them in an environmentally safe and sound way. The environment can't deal with these dams. Second, from a geopolitical point of view, the dam is always a complex conversation with a neighboring country or a neighboring region. Even within states, within nations, building a dam actually immediately asks for a conversation with your neighbor. So a dam can actually do good, but then it really demands thorough management, thorough building, and a real look into scale. Now, with our increasing economy and urbanization growth and the occupation of land, our biodiversity loss. Okay? And I think you saw the IPBES report that came out like over a month ago. It came from the UN research committee that looked at biodiversity loss and actually tells us that the world is not in a good place when we think about biodiversity. And it's on us. There's no one else to blame. It's people like me, white male, 51 plus, that actually put the hardest burden on biodiversity, but I'm not alone. There's more. It's industry, it's government, it's all of us. And that biodiversity means more stress on the water system, because more loss actually means more vulnerability. So it's not only nice, there is a need for biodiversity for mankind to survive. Now, looking into climate change, we have the Paris Agreement, right? And in Paris in December 2015, the world agreed to not let it become warmer post-industrial levels than 2 degrees Celsius. And then the Paris Agreement also wrote down an ambition, a political ambition. It said, but it better be 1.5. Nobody knew what that meant. So, political agreement on 2, political ambition on 1.5. But there was this idea that with 1.5 we could save small island and development states. And we were pretty sure that with 2 degrees we couldn't. And in a UN context, losing countries, not a good idea. So 1.5 is an ambition. So the UN IPCC, UNFCCC, the climate part of the UN, asked the IPCC, which is the collaborative of thousands of researchers from around the world, to do a deep dive into the difference between 2 and 1.5. What is that? What is the difference between these two worlds? Is it a lot? Is it not? Well, actually, it is massive. That is what the researchers say. The difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees is massive. The window of opportunity to change is now, and then we have to change a lot, but it's massive. It's a world without coral reefs, or with at least 30% of the current coral reefs we have. It's a world where extreme heat will be almost 3 times as worse. Can you imagine? The difference, not the 1.5, but the difference between 1.5 and 2 makes the world 2.6 times worse when you think about heat. And this goes for extreme events, and storms, and sea level rise, and biodiversity loss, and for the economic damages. So we're worse off. So we have something to save and care for. 1.5 is not only a nice ambition, it's a good ambition. It's an ambition to deliver upon. Now, how can I do this without an image? Well, I can try. Yeah? I'll do it. You got it. I still have this idea that you get. So, if we look at the future, and this, I think this is the key of what I want to say. Well, I start a little doom and gloom. The world is a little doom and gloom. Actually, it is a lot. I come in too many places where people really die, economies are really lost, and biodiversity is really going out the window, like nothing. And I come from a family that I was born and raised out of hope. Hope is in my genes, and optimism. My mother was a community worker, school teacher, the first female school director post-World War II in the Netherlands. She had the UN motto, leaving no one behind, written all over her soul. Bless her soul. She was an amazing woman. She taught me that people, the power is in people. And there's always a next step, never give up. And my father was an architect coming out of a family of architects. His father and grandfather were all architects. So 3 generations of engineers, architects. So beauty and functionalism were his motto. But somebody has to live in the house, right? So it was people at the center. And he thought that every problem, he liked problems. The bigger, the better, almost. Every problem was the opportunity towards a solution by collaboration. So these 2 people taught me that there is hope. So don't worry, while it might sound doom and gloom, I'm still on the side where I think there is definitely if we can do this together. But if you look at the future, the challenges are big, right? Environmental challenges, economic challenge, security challenge, geopolitical challenges, safety challenges on a very individual as well as on a community, a city, a regional scale, climate challenges, and so forth, and so forth. So these challenges are becoming bigger and bigger and are more interrelated than ever. And this is where I think the biggest challenge is for us. Well, in the 50s, 70 years ago, challenges were still pretty much single. You could single them out, we thought. You had a problem, you brought a solution to the table, everybody was happy for at least a couple of years. Now, when you do that, everybody is unhappy tomorrow. There are no single focused solutions to these complex problems. But we thought in the past that we could engineer our way out of our problems. Problem, we thought was single focused, so the solution could be single focused too. But the interrelationship between all these challenges is complex. And that demands that if we look ahead, that there is a disconnect between the policies and regulations and the way we deal with each other and govern and the challenges. We still have a system that's siloed up, that works in frameworks that are, often single focused. And cutting across is often the worst, is the most challenging. So collaboration at the heart of that, while so amazingly powerful and empowering for everyone, because it really brings everyone to the table and secures solutions that really make an impact, is also the most challenging. We are more and more siloed up, and the disconnect between these silos and the challenges often can't be bigger. But we drafted the Sustainable Development Goals as a comprehensive agenda, not as 17 silos, a comprehensive agenda. We set the Paris Agreement target as a comprehensive target, looking at mitigation and adaptation. And at the same time, we know that business as usual, the way we dealt with it in the past, is not only not enough, it's becoming lethal. Too many casualties, too many losses. So instead of, and I'm going to say this anyway, instead of investing our money in stupid infrastructure, which is happening all over the world right now, we have to take away that we have trillions on our banks we spend in non-responsive infrastructure, because we have the models to do benefit cost analysis for non-responsive infrastructure. And when there's a disaster, we do it on reactive infrastructure. Infrastructure that is post the disaster doing a little better. So we had a flood, we had a drought, we had an extreme event, we had a fire, but we have to become proactive. But proactive means that you have to come up with solutions without a solid base, without policy that was developed over years, without tested technology. Reinventing ourselves by collaboration means a systems approach. And the World Economic Forum says this too. It tells us that the challenges are becoming more complex, more impactful, and more extreme every day. So this is your bedtime story. Did you have a good day? Yeah, I had a good day. Well, talk to this Dutch guy. We'll see. Well, you better, because tomorrow is worse. So that's not the story you want to tell your children or grandchildren. You want to be able to tell them tomorrow is better. But there's an opportunity. And this is where I believe, and if I look across the room, this is also where I think you believe, is that if we can bring it together, if we can bring these different interests, these silos, these economic, cultural, environmental, social perspectives to the same table, across agencies, across sectors, across layers of government, across public and private and NGOs and universities, across countries and regions. If you can bring that together, you can come up with comprehensive solutions that do stick. So it means, it demands a systems approach that comes from the understanding of the complexity, valuing across these different approaches, and then managing it accordingly. Now, that's transformative. At the same time, we know there's a bulk we need to take care of. Right? On water and sanitation, there's a bulk we need to take care of. We can't leave anyone behind. So how do you mix real transformative approaches by taking a step-by-step approach? So it's almost too complex, but it can be done. This systems approach depends on 5 things. One, it demands a long-term and comprehensive approach. So you have to be able to look at the long-term in a connective, comprehensive, holistic way. And it means connecting the dots across all challenges. Long-term, but long-term and comprehensive is, demands research and understanding and collaboration, but also can mean a plan on a shelf. A book nobody reads, nobody puts to practice. So the long-term, comprehensive approach has to be coupled immediately with short-term, current-day interventions. Tests, projects, pipelines, investments, up and down. So the plan needs the projects, as well as the projects need the plan. Because a project without that vision, without that comprehensive approach, starts to fall apart. Becomes an incident, has negative external effects. So you need the plan to have the project, you need the project to have the plan. That can only be done in the best way if you do this inclusive, collaborative, bringing all stakeholders together from all skills, from all backgrounds, from all interests. So it has to be inclusive through every step of the process. And transparent. Transparency is critically important because you need transparency for trust and building of trust. You need transparency for accountability. Transparency, accountability towards your voters, but also your investors. You need transparency to build a business case, but you also need transparency to learn. Because every step down the road in this very wicked process will also show mistakes next to successes, and you have to learn from both. You have to know why things were right, but you also have to know why things went wrong. So long-term and short-term, inclusive and transparent. If you do this right, if you connect this right, you build capacity. And that capacity is both individual, professional, across all partners, but it's also capacity that's institutional. It builds capacity in policy, in regulations, in governance, in ways of finance. So long-term, short-term, inclusive and transparent builds capacity. If you want to scale this up, if you want to fast-track this, you need innovation. You need a process of testing, of building capacity, of trying everything, of doing it out of the box. Next to this is that with the need for investments for these best projects, there's often a shy away from the investment in the process. How many times do you hear an investor, being at the World Bank or a foreign donor country, say, I want a pipeline of projects. Give me a pipeline of projects, and I'll spend the money. And often you hear there are millions or even sometimes billions to spend on pipelines. Climate and environmental or social and economic related projects. But then we forget that to get to that pipeline, to ensure that implementation also has public support, and that maintenance and operation comes out of ownership, understanding and trust. Next to the project, it really is about an enabling environment. And that does not cost $1 billion, but it might cost millions. And then if you look in the practices of our financial institutes, the millions are not there. I can find the hundreds of millions and billions for projects more easily than I can find the millions for the supporting process to get us to the pipeline, ensure the pipeline is backed up with validation and evaluation, with maintenance and operations, with the right type of governance, capacity building and technical assistance, and the creation of trust, building trust, ownership and education. That enabling environment among governments, among citizens, among communities, among NGOs, but also with institutional international partners from across the world, is critically important. An enabling environment, the millions to spend the billions right, are critically important. And they demand from the partners, including the Netherlands, as a donor country, and our financial institutions, collaboration. Collaboration coming out of transparency, trust, and support. They also demand consistency. There's no one-off. You can't start a project and then, island hop to the next region. No, consistency, continuity, commitment, capacity building, critically important. Next to cross-cutting, we need those projects that really make a difference, that set off a pipeline. At the same time, consistency, continuity, commitment for this enabling environment is critically important. So it takes everyone to change everything, right? There's another part of that million and the billions, and that comes from economic research, that the more you invest, the better you do the process. The better you ensure everybody's on the table, you do your research right, you maximize opportunities. And that's exactly what we need. We need to maximize opportunities. And second, you not only maximize opportunities, the performance of the projects you develop and implement is much higher. So you get better projects in a wider range. So it's a no-brainer, but it's so tough to implement. It's so tough to organize. Now, having said that, how much time do we give? Okay, so I come from the Netherlands. Who of you ever was in the Netherlands? Wow, that's good. And if I would, the Netherlands is often perceived as a very wet place, right? Yeah? We sometimes think of us as like a mini Bangladesh. If you put us on our side, and this is what I do, and then I put us on our side, it's like a delta. We're not as challenging as Bangladesh, but there was a question why we stayed there. Well, it was the richness of the soil, and of course water. Water as a way of life, water as culture. And we learned by managing water at the core of collaboration, next to engineering and design and planning, with collaboration, that we could live with that water. Already 900 years ago. So 900 years ago we started to manage water. 900 years ago the Netherlands was not a country yet. 900 years ago we didn't have the European Union yet. It's like a long time ago. We were a bunch of city-states, but we understood water was critical. So 900 years ago we installed our first regional water authority. We paid taxes on the community scale to these people that safeguard our houses, our cattle, our crops to stay dry or have enough water. And we paid a little taxes to ensure that they did that. And over time we had hundreds of them. Every region had such a regional. Now we have 21. We merged them into very efficient and effective governance system. By constitution, our fourth layer of government. So we have 4 layers: cities, provinces, water authorities, and national government. Second, they did this on 2 principles: safety, dry feet, for economy, but also quality of the land, of the environment. Because we learned rapidly that quality of the environment, we didn't have the word biodiversity yet, but if we would have had it, we would have said quality of biodiversity. Quality of the land will safeguard our economy, will safeguard our health. And we learned, of course, the hard way, with floods, with droughts, but also with cholera. In the mid-19th century, we had a massive cholera outbreak. This was also the time when we were drafting our constitution, when we became a kingdom. In 1901, so a little over 100 years ago, 120 years ago almost, we wrote our housing law, a law for housing for the most vulnerable. In the housing law, water quality and sanitation, the WASH program, and like we know it now, was embedded because we knew health, critically important for vulnerability, so water quality and sanitation, critically important for health. So water in the Netherlands is not only about building big dams or dams, or having institutions that understand it, it is also about maintaining that type of quality. We have institutional capacity, 1 ministry responsible for water with the Delta Commissioner. We take care of water quality across these layers of government, and post our disasters, we try to do better. Now, we are no saints. So we lose land, we lost people because of disasters, but every time we try to pick up the pieces in a better way. Look at the future, not the past. Use the disaster as an opportunity to prepare yourself for the next and not respond to the one you just lost. And I think one of them I will explain a bit, and then I'll try to wrap it up. And it is not so long ago, in 1995, we had almost floods. So our rivers were burst, so not from the sea, not from a storm, but from rain and bad water management in France and Germany and Switzerland. So our rivers almost bursted, and we evacuated 250,000 people. 250,000 people, we safeguard their lives and livelihoods to ensure that they were not flooded. And it made us understand that also our rivers, like the Mississippi, had become canals. Did not have the capacity to meander. So we said we have to bring back the room for the river. And that brought us to the idea that a river is a living thing. It's something that needs the attention on a daily basis, not be treated as a canal. So we drafted a program for the whole of the Netherlands, a whole delta riverine system, with 39 interventions, investing almost 2.5 billion euros in this riverine system, creating more room for the river, moving people out of harm's way. And I can tell you that is not okay. Also in the Netherlands, even with the water culture, people just don't like it when the government comes in and says, we need your land for water. A farmer doesn't like the government then, doesn't like the government never. So a citizen has a problem when, so room for the river was a rigorous collaborative approach. We talked to everyone and actually gave grant subsidies, the millions, to spend the millions, to the farmers to come up with better plans. And they came up with better plans. They competed with our engineers from the government and said, hey, if we want to stay, if we raise our farms, is that okay? And the benefit cost analysis, based on these principles of safety and quality, actually made it possible that they could stay in the places where their farmland was. 39 projects all across the Netherlands making room for that river. The presentation you will see, beautiful images, of course. We did the same on the coast, we did the same in our cities. And it means that living with water demands a comprehensive approach. And that is a comprehensive approach we'd like to bring to other places. And that was also the reason why the Dutch government said 4 years ago, Henk, do you want to become our special envoy for international water affairs? That I said yes. In my role, it's about raising awareness, but also really about trying to build partnerships. Partnerships with governments, NGOs, researchers, investors, communities across the world that are in need, where water management is a critical aspect for a better tomorrow, and where that partnership can lead to opportunities to collaborate on. We do this in more rural places, where water is scarce, and more coastal and urban places, where there's too much water, with data, with research and knowledge programs, with policies and governance and collaboration. Also the reason why I joined the high-level panel on water, my Prime Minister was part, we supported that as a way to build a collective understanding on how to deal with water. I'm here now in Afghanistan to talk a little bit about the global challenge, I stopped because I think it would be good to hear from you some of your questions, but also some of the challenges you face, and see where this conversation could lead to a collaboration. Thank you.
Let's have Ambassador Robin, thank you very much for a very motivational presentation. We learned too much from the presentation. So sorry for this connection of projector as well. You mentioned about the importance of the consistency, inclusion, cooperation, transparency, commitment. But the question is how we can do it, how we can achieve it. As I mentioned before, because of decades of armed conflict in Afghanistan, we couldn't manage our water, and more than 70% of our surface water flowing into neighboring countries. On the other side, Afghanistan neighboring have not undertaken any effort to incorporate Afghanistan into their institutionalized cooperation frameworks and initiatives on the transboundary water. For example, in 2004, Iran and Turkmenistan have jointly built a very large reservoir dam called Dosti or Turkmenistan-Iran Friendship Dam without any engagement of Afghanistan. Another example, at the regional level, there are two main institutions responsible for transboundary water management in the Darya Basin. First is ICWC, the Interstate Commission for Water Coordination, and second is IFAS, International Fund for Saving Oral Sea. Although Afghanistan is one of the major contributors to Darya River flow, Afghanistan is not part of this legal framework, unfortunately. You know, in our region, transboundary water management is strongly linked to geopolitical context characterized by intra-regional power imbalances, refugees. We have more than 5 million refugees in Pakistan and Iran, and could be used and leveraged as a put pressure on the government, you know. And Afghanistan is landlocked country, and we need to access the free port of countries like Pakistan and Iran. I want to know how may water diplomacy get countries in this region work together collaboratively. What steps should be taken in reality? Because as I mentioned, there is no evidence to support there is a collaboration, engagement in the water transboundary in this region, and every country is committing to just take a bigger share of water. I would like to know your lesson there and how we can address this tough challenge in Afghanistan.
So this is a question with no easy answer. But I expect you don't expect an easy answer to this. I take an example which is now under big stress, which is the collaboration in the Nile River Basin. which is a collaboration that actually exists long and is supported by international community. It tries to deal as countries dependent on the Nile to collaborate and allocate the water in such a way that these countries, Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, are of course the three main countries. Ethiopia built now the Renaissance Dam. It's one of the biggest dams, perhaps, it's huge, it's a very big dam. The impact of the dam on the environment are still a little bit unknown because it will create a massive lake in a region where there was never a massive lake. We don't even know what it will do to the environment, to weather patterns. And at the same time, of course, this increases the tensions between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. And then the current situation in Sudan is in itself already complex. They don't need a dam or a Nile to be in a complex situation. Still, the countries continue the conversation. There was even more or less celebration of the, and I forgot the 25 years. I'll skip the years, but the celebration of the so many years of collaboration around the Nile, where so the lesson coming from that Nile is that these parties don't agree, but they talk. And I think this is the biggest challenge. How can you continue to organize a table where you come together with knowing that you might not easily agree, but you can still ensure that by following an agenda, having perhaps a third party as a broker, to ensure that you always take the next step. I think that's an important lesson. I chair conversations between different countries and different places around the world where water is a reason for a conflict or a distrust. And it is a process with falling down and standing up again. It's a back and forth. It's never easy. It will never show fast, easy results. But every time, on a yearly and a 2-yearly and a 3-yearly basis, it is always worth it. So, then to your situation, how can you help organize such an approach that is tougher? You mentioned Turkmenistan and Pakistan and Iran. And there are more players here, India for one, in the context of engagement in dams. So looking around transboundary, having a transboundary water conversation here will be definitely challenging. But if you look at how you want to deal with water sustainably towards the future of your children and grandchildren, it is a necessity.
Thank you for your response. If you are, let's take some question from audiences. Okay, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Very interesting. Rare to get such kind of presentation sessions in Kabul. Thanks to you, Mr. Razimi, and Dr. Somalia. I work for IDOG. IDOG is a government agency leading all subnational entities. We have 45,000 villages, nearly 400 districts, 34 provinces across the country. Water is a source of conflict at the local level. It's a serious problem. It's a serious challenge for the government, for our local communities. My question is particularly on spatial planning. How important is spatial planning? Spatial planning.
Spatial planning.
Spatial planning. How important is spatial planning in addressing most of these conflicts that are happening at the local level? And how can we use water to strengthen state legitimacy, like other basic services? For instance, 1/3 of the territory in the country is not in the hands of the government. So education is a source of stability, a source of strengthening state legitimacy at the local level, because the Taliban, the insurgents, the groups who are against the government cannot deliver it. So it's only the government that can provide education for the public. How do you think that water can be used same as other basic services to strengthen legitimacy and stability?
Thank you, sir. Is there another question? Okay. Would you please, Sir Kabir?
Thank you, Excellency. It was very pleasant listening to you. You ended your presentations by two positive words. One, of course, partnership, and the second being collaboration. I represent an economic think tank, the Afghan Institute. Our experience here shows that a number of IFIs, the traditional conventional development institutions, namely ADB, AIB, and the World Bank, they believe in hardcore infrastructure. While you criticize the non-responsive infrastructure, how would you get them to collaborate around this common agenda if they still are so strongly believing in this traditional ways of developing infrastructure?
Thank you, Mr. Kabir. And the last question, the first round. Would you please, Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Ambassador Henkelmink. My question is more on the climate change. As we see, there's more competition on them mining Arctic resources. Recently, Russia has invested 1/10 of its investment on military bases in the Arctic, and there's more competition between different countries, European countries, Russia and US, on extracting trillions of dollars worth oil and rare metal from that region. Don't you think that contributes to the climate change and increases the extreme heat and heat wave and all that is brought due to the climate change?
Thank you, sir.
It's a pleasant sound in a complex complex situation. I go to the last immediately. Yes, science proves that fossil fuel is part of the problem, not part of the solution in the context of climate change. And the more emissions, the worse off we are. This is also why we set the target of reducing emissions and moving to renewables. The less we do so, the worse tomorrow will be. Actually, everybody agrees, but it's very tough to change because it's not so much about the misunderstanding, because already in the 60s and the 70s, and those reports are all publicly available, our bigger oil producers like Exxon, but also our own Shell, produced reports that they are big carbon emitters and increase vulnerability to the world. The challenge here is not so much that the understanding lacks. The challenge is, of course, is power and money. And the question here is that it is becoming interesting in a way that if money is the only driver for change, renewable energy now becomes more cheap than fossil. Is that then the trigger? Then my question still is, what is then the cultural aspect of that trigger? I'm sorry that it is not a happy answer, but it is a less situation. Third to the IFIs, how can we convince every day? Luckily there are great examples working with the IFIs that softer, more comprehensive, inclusive approaches leading to perhaps softer or hard, but more granular approaches actually work. But it does mean that you have to invest in each other in the process. As an example, and I will share it with the presentation, I couldn't share it in the story, I started a new program on 3 coastal cities here in Asia. We can do this on inland cities too, but we started on 3 coastal cities because the vulnerability in the context of climate change is so hard. Chennai in India, Khulna in Bangladesh, and Semarang in Indonesia, where we brought the cities, the communities in these cities, NGOs of the cities, together with provincial and national governments, together with international experts and local experts, together with 10 of the IFIs. So AIB, World Bank, ADB, but also the Green Climate Fund, the Islamic Development Bank, FMO from the Netherlands, KfW from Germany, AFD from France, JICA from Japan, and I think I forgot one. And together in the process of not focusing on hard infrastructure or soft infrastructure, but focusing on what are the challenges in these complex situations of cities. And I mentioned one example, which is Chennai. Chennai is a coastal city, rapidly growing. In the past, they managed water naturally. They kept it in small ponds. They called them, when they were not ponds, but religious places, tanks. So it's like a pyramid, but then upside down, collecting the water, harvesting it, and then bringing it back to the aquifer. Those were the old days. But with Chennai now, a city with almost over 10 million people, those tanks, 10,000 of those tanks are all lost. And the water comes into the city with big rain events and then a long time with drought, so it moves out the city. It actually is polluting the aquifer. The aquifer is depleted because everybody takes the water out. And the government, with support of the IFIs, is building big desalination plants. Desalination plants that actually make their carbon footprint worse. So in the context of climate change, like the wrong investment. With the banks, with the cities, with the government, with the experts, we analyzed it and said, hey, there is a water balance. There's actually too much. If you can take care of the water like we did in the old days, keep the water in your city, recharge the aquifer in a natural way, mitigate flood events with nature-based solutions. And that project proposal now goes through the IFI process because they liked it the best. So it really demands a rigorous approach of collaboration from the beginning, not presenting them an idea, but having them with you while discovering the complexity of the issues and let them own these more complex solutions too. It's building capacity not only in the community, it's also building capacity in the government, in IFIs and other institutes. So it's an example where it can work. I'm not saying it's easy, then again, great things are never easy. Like a marriage, it's you need to invest in it. Sorry, Marlies. She just married last week. Yeah, so it's always amazing. That's what I said. Yeah. So, second, the third question, which was the second question, water is a source of conflict, was actually your first question. Where are you? Yeah.
Question is.
Yeah. Your first. Yes. Not only between nations. Between people. There are religious stories, cultural stories where water was a source of conflict in different ways. The only way forward is to bring it to a table where the two parties of a conflict might perhaps invite a third or a fourth party to reach a common understanding and a common ground to move forward. But you have to shy away from negotiation. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges we all face. We think by coming to a table that we can negotiate. But negotiation is something different than collaboration. With negotiation, you know what you want. You have like a minimum. So you go, and this is what I want. And you come home and you say to your daughter, when your daughter asks you says, well, what did you get? And you say, well, Daddy did well. I got 60%. Your daughter will say, you just lost 40. Negotiation always comes with a loss. Collaboration comes with a gain because it's not that you come in and say, this is what I want, but this is what I bring. And a collaboration, and this is to your second question with planning, collaboration starts to aggregate needs and opportunities. And not only needs, it starts to aggregate from an assessment and a more comprehensive, inclusive, holistic approach, where the mix of needs and become opportunities. If you only look at it silo-based, sectoral, every need indeed becomes a default. If you start to connect social, cultural, environmental, economic, climate-related challenges, then you see opportunities. Like Room for the River was a business case because it was not only on too much water or too little water, it was also quality of the water, urban development, private sector investment, biodiversity loss and opportunity to increase. And all of a sudden we were able to create business cases out of this very comprehensive way. From a silo perspective, a failed case. We would have had angry farmers, like we did when we built the railroad between our ports in the western part of the Netherlands and the border with Germany. That railroad, it is in place, but was a total loss and a total legal and real fight. Every farmer battled the government, and they got more than they needed. Why? Because we thought, easy peasy, we can build a railroad. Well, forget it. It is about collaboration. Your second question is planning. Planning, especially on that local level, brings it together. It is a methodology to get to holistic and comprehensive approach. It is also a methodology to get to collaboration. A planning and design process brings stakeholders together. And I think that is to be understood. It's also what this new program, Water as Leverage in Asia, is doing too. It's a planning and design approach where you try to bring people together from the start, building understanding and awareness and capacity before getting to conclusions. So planning is critically important. Problem is, if planning becomes only a technical process and not a social process, then you just lost it. Then you again say, oh, let's silo it out. Let's take a department of planning. It's their responsibility. They have to come up with a plan and then we'll see and respond. No. If planning is not holistic, comprehensive and collaborative, then it's not planning, but then it's a technical exercise. And then it won't resolve your challenges.
Thank you. Ambassador, your last book, Too Big, Rebel by Design.
Yeah.
Talk about your book and would you please share with us the main lesson there to address Afghanistan challenges, because your book, I think, is about the lesson learned about Hurricane Sandy, yes?
Yeah.
Would you please share with us the main lesson there from your book to address the challenges of Afghanistan?
Yes, I will. When Hurricane Sandy hit the New York region, it caused $60 billion of damage because it was New York. It's a big city, so when it floods, you have a big loss. People really died. Not thousands, but dozens. 255,000 houses were lost. So it's a big mess for a big region. And at that time, President Obama was President of the United States. And I was asked to join his task force. So we, collaborative approach, said, I need a task force. I need something where everyone can come together. 23 federal agencies working together with all the states, indigenous groups, cities, but also with the task force we had partnerships with private sector, NGOs and others. So we tried to spend 60 billion, that was one. We set up a whole framework and mechanism to do that, looking at insurance, housing for the most vulnerable, resilient infrastructure, and so forth, and so forth. But one of the things that the president said was, rebuilding a region is one, but how can we rebuild it not only better, but really better? And what are the critical examples? So when I was approached to join the task force, I had an idea to challenge the world and the region to really do leapfrog approaches, something that's very innovative. That was actually not so easy. They thought that they just do a call for solutions and then get over with it. But I said, no, it has to be collaborative. So in the end, it turned into a competition, not to compete, but to challenge. So not a competition with winners and losers, but more a challenge to challenge public and private sector to do its utmost best to really deliver on something that really would be transformative. So we invited the world, we got 148 teams from all over the world trying to work with us. We selected 10, and in the end we worked with 535 organizations of the New York region, plus dozens of government agencies, NGOs. We had activists like Occupy Sandy together with bankers. It was a little weird, I must say. But the process of inclusion helped us in the beginning to understand this climate, economic and environmental problem also as a cultural problem. Bringing all these experts to the places that were hit hardest also made us understand, because everybody was saying, well, the next time the first aid and responders have to move in faster. And I would say, but suppose we can prevent the disaster. They said, well, you can't prevent the disaster. So it was like a big gap in understanding that we thought you could prevent disasters like this, or at least the impact. And they thought, no, well, forget it. The only thing you can do is repair faster. And so bridging that gap was already cultural. Then coming with a comprehensive analysis where you could really say, oh, these are the hotspots where if you do something here, it starts to create a ripple effect. Not only in more resilient infrastructure, but also in community awareness, educational programs, and so forth. So the competition, the challenge was called Rebuild by Design. So rebuild in an innovative way. It took us 9 months to deliver out of this assessment of vulnerabilities and interdependencies and opportunities, a long list of 40 plus opportunities, and then we selected 10. We built coalitions, local coalitions with these teams of experts, developed innovative solutions, and then got the funding, and then we scaled it up again to the rest of the US with the National Disaster Resiliency Competition, and we repeated that in the California, San Francisco Bay with Resilient by Design, because we wanted to do it pre and not post-disaster. That competition attracted a lot of public sector funding, but also private sector funding per project. In my current role as special envoy, I travel a lot, so every time I embarked on a plane, I started to write the book. The result was the book you mentioned. And the main lessons are listed as follows. It's called Too Big, not because I'm pessimistic, but because I'm optimistic. It's too big to ignore this climate challenge, so we have to embrace it. It's also too big to simplify, so we have to embrace the complexity too. This is not about ignoring the complexity, but seeing it as an opportunity. This complexity is really our opportunity for real change. It's also too big for our systems, the way we deal with it, policy, regulations, governance. So we have to create a safe space where you can build trust. Rebuild by Design was such a place where we brought everybody together, like your transboundary challenge. Build a place and a space where you can come together, where you can build trust even if you don't like each other. My team got hate mail because there was a total distrust in the government. And we went on and on and on and on, inviting everyone to the table until we had blisters on our lips and on our tongue, in the talking and the engagement, trying over and over again. It's too big to go alone, it has to be inclusive, and it's too big for fragmentation. So yes, you need consistency, continuity, but also planning and design to act now. So the last lesson is really that there is no escape. We have to act now.
thank you because time is up. The remaining question can be asked during the tea break. Just AISS would like to thank your support and your very fantastic presentation. Just a small gift is provided. Dr. Muradian, Director General of AISS, wants to appreciate your support. Thank you, sir.
Then we have this handmade job. Let's have it. You want to make sure water or wine?
Water. I can only drink water.
Yes. So
And I'll give you the book.
thank you.
Yeah?
This is saffron again, environmental friendly.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. It's a real pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, before you can enjoy.
I also want to thank Ms. Azimi for moderating this session. It's excellent. You did a great job you did. And from our side, we have a present. And surprisingly, as a will be including a book, and I'm sure you will find a lot of pictures that shows the importance of water in the Netherlands. And then also, Mr. Mariam, I want to thank you very much for hosting this event.
Pleasure.
And really, I think maybe also on behalf of all the participants, thank you for hosting this. And also for a different book.
Thank you.
And then the counterpart of Jorg, AISS. Okay. Just intro into the work. Preparation, and thank you very much, and also for you. Thank you.
Have some tea and biscuit.
Yes, please help yourself.